Hello, and welcome to Kaylee's Nightmares, a podcast that delves into the bizarre, chilling, and terrifying stories of myself and our listeners. I am your host, Kaylee. Today's author is Reddit user CIA Herpes, who also writes as J.H. Salem. Story is narrated by myself. So turn off the lights, lock your doors, and hide under your covers. This is My Father Always Kept the Shed Locked. Today, I found out why. Growing up, I remember it all vividly. Anytime my friends or I got too close to the shed, my dad would come out hollering and yelling, telling us to stay away from there and that it was no place for kids. He told me he had expensive tools and dangerous chemicals stored there. As a child, I didn't question it. It was just one of those things. In my mind, I have been born into a world where the sun rises in the east, breakfast is the first meal of the day, and the shed stays locked. They were true, self-evident, and simply the way things existed in my young mind. But as I grew older and eventually moved off to college, I began to question the shed more. My father still wouldn't let me look in there. In fact, he kept the sole key on his person at all times. Even when he slept, he would keep the key in his pocket. Then, during my second semester at a nearby state university, I got a call that every son or daughter dreads. I was attending a lecture on anatomy when my phone lit up, ringing silently in the great crowded hall. Looking down, I saw it was my brother's number. I went outside, lighting up a cigarette and answering it. "Hello?" I said. "Gil?" My brother answered immediately. "Luke, thank God you answered," he said. "It's Dad. He's been taken to the hospital. He's had some sort of a medical emergency. Can you meet us there?" "In maybe 25 minutes?" I said I would, hanging up. I grabbed my stuff in the lecture hall and made my way to the car. 22 minutes later, I pulled up to the hospital. It was too late, however. My father had died of a heart attack on the way. He was declared dead on arrival. Our mother had died of breast cancer 10 years earlier, so Gil and I were the last two of the Morton bloodline. My brother was a good guy, though somewhat of a waste case, constantly smoking weed and dropping acid. He had a tendency to travel out far across the country without notice, moving around to see nature or go to music festivals. That is, when he had the money. And since he worked as a freelance writer, he was often broke. He really wanted to get at the money Dad had left us. He wanted the money from the house most of all. He told me repeatedly that it would be enough to tide him over until he got footing in the writing industry. He just needed to make a name for himself and then the money would start rolling in. He had his heart set on it. He would write anything that he could make money off of, from horror stories to romances, short stories to novels, even technical manuals or freelance journalism articles. As we walked to the house together, for the first time in months, he repeated his mantra to me again. "Just enough to tide me over, Luke." "I think you're probably gonna burn through the money Dad left you," I said. "Why don't you get a real job and just write on the side?" He gave me a sideways look. "Did you see Hunter S. Thompson getting a real job while just writing on the side?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, he was a journalist." I began as we walked into the house, but we both stopped simultaneously when we saw what was on the coffee table. It was all of Dad's possessions he had when he died. They were placed neatly in a line: his wallet, his phone, his car, and house key. Some cash, and last of all, a little shed key on a thin leather chain. "What do you think is really in that shed?" I asked. Gil looked at me, pale and wide, in the dark living room. I don't know if I want to find out," Gil said, whispering as if he were in a church or a funeral home. I put my head on his shoulder and shook him gently. "Of course we need to find out," I said. "You and I own this property now." "We should go look right now," he breathed in sharply. No, don't be an idiot," Gil whispered. "It's dark now. In the morning, we can go together. In the morning. You've waited 20 years to find out. I think you can wait a few more hours." But there was something pleading in his voice, something scared and childlike. It reminded me of when I was scared as a little boy at bedtime, telling my dad there were monsters in the closet and he would open up the door and I'd tell him to stop, that they were going to hurt him if he opens up that door. But he would open up the door and there'd be no monsters in there. Surely it was the same here. Gil would see, and for that matter, so would I. There were no monsters in there. Thank you for listening, and if you want to add to the podcast, which is a collaborative story platform, please enter your own story at Kaylee's Nightmares on Facebook, r/Kaylee's Nightmares on Reddit, or send it by email to kayleesnightmares@gmail.com to have your story read on the pod. This story was significantly longer than other ones that we have had posted in the past, so we have decided to break it up into multiple parts. That being said, we will be releasing at least one part a week, hopefully, until the story is complete. If you would like to follow the author, please go ahead and follow him on Reddit at CIA Herpes. Thank you and have a good night.